Hi there. My name is Chelsea Goucher, and I am an intuitive coach, psychedelic facilitator, astrologer, and yogi. And my business, Awakening Chandra, draws on my education from these different modalities as well as the life experience that I've had in my own awakening process to help reconnect individuals to their inner knowing, help them reconnect to their spiritual center and to that still small voice that will help them stay in alignment and on their true path versus the often confusing and circuitous paths that it seems like the world is often pushing us down or suggesting that, that's the route we take for happiness. So that's a little bit, about who I am and what my business is about. As far as my own personal journey and my background, before I owned Awakening Chandra, I started my entrepreneurial journey actually as a co-owner of a food business. And even though the entrepreneurial part of it was in alignment for me, the business itself was not. And so I spent several years really honing my skills in business before I stepped into what was truly aligned for me, which was creating a business around the journey, the spiritual path that I had been walking for several years and which had led me into entrepreneurism in the first place as a way to create more freedom and impact in my life, and also to feel empowered that my mind and my energy and what I bring to the table was being used for the highest good in life and not just making someone else money. So previous to that first entrepreneurial endeavor, I was actually a corporate salesperson. I'd mostly worked in sales jobs for most of my life. And, I've always been a very good person at playing the game of meeting people's expectations and doing exactly what they want me to do. I always say that I would have made a great politician. And, I've had a lot of life experiences that really helped me to see how my constant need for external validation and to feel liked by people and to want to be popular and to fit in really molded me and shaped the way my mind works and prevented me from really living to my full potential, because I was always so worried about, what people thought of me or how I would be perceived. And a lot of this goes back to really deep fears and programming around, what it means to be a good person. So as I've kind of unraveled these things in myself, it's really just blossomed and awakened this massive passion I have for helping other people. And that's really why I took my entrepreneurial journey this direction and want to talk about the things I'm here talking about today, and why I'm really excited to connect with more people and share more about Awakening Chandra and what I do. So we're all here because we're about manifesting abundance. And I really feel like what I bring to the table when it comes to that topic is abundance in the areas of freedom and abundance in the areas of time. One of the things that when I was at the very beginning of my awakening journey, I really felt that in the corporate life I was living, I never had the time or the freedom I felt to truly live my life according to my values and actually act upon the dreams and desires I had. I felt stuck, like I was on that hamster wheel, and I know a lot of you can probably relate to that feeling. And so for me, my first real desire for abundance wasn't necessarily about money, but it was about time and it was about freedom. And I think that all of these concepts are super interconnected and related, because time is money, freedom is money. So much of what we create starts in here, and that includes freedom, and that includes time, and that includes money. So manifesting abundance for me is really about talking about mindset. And mindset is the way I approach things because I tend to be a pretty cerebral person. I was always a bookworm as a kid. It's kind of why I got funneled into this real good girl programming, is because I was good at getting good grades, showing up for the teachers. Like I said, doing all the things I was expected to do. And I started to understand as I began to delve into spirituality and kind of delve into these questions of like, why aren't I happy? Why don't I feel fulfilled? Even though, I have this successful career and this job and all this money. And what I realized is that a lot of what I identified as myself wasn't actually me. It was thoughts and programming that had been placed there by my parents, by my teachers, by society. I'm sure some of it intentionally and most of it not. It's generational programming that gets passed down. And it's often not done maliciously, as we know, but it's done when, our providers, our care providers, our parents, they haven't done the work themselves of sussing out the own truth of who they are. So bringing it back to manifesting abundance, I really truly believe that everything starts with our thoughts and that thoughts are energy. And as most of you that are also on your own journey of awakening have come to understand, it's so much less about healing than it really is about wiping away the mud to like reveal that lotus within. And that's not to say that healing doesn't have a place in the awakening process or even in like just the personal development process. I mean, it's all kind of one continuum. And the fact of the matter is most of us do have to address trauma and various other things that we need to heal from in order to stop repeating those stories ourselves. But even beyond the healing aspect of spiritual work and personal development is just the deeper aspect of our programming and how insidious it can be to our freedom if we aren't able to recognize it. And that's really where I feel like I connect with people is I have had traumatic experiences in my life. I've overcome addiction. I was, a heroin addict for 3.5 years in my early 20s. I've overcome abusive relationships. I've had a lot of traumas that have impacted my self-image. But as I began to strip those away and really start to gain back my self-confidence, what I realized that there was like also a deeper layer of programming, really deep, that I think, ties into deep ways our society has been shaped for thousands of years, that come from, religion, the patriarchy, power and control systems, so many different things. And I don't necessarily want or need to go into that right now. But the point is that even those of us that feel very healed and that feel like life is in a good place and we have a good self-image and we've built that back up, we can still fall victim to that programming because it is so deep in our unconscious and subconscious mind. It's so deep, it's almost like in our cellular level. It's almost in our DNA. And, I'm not a scientist and I'm not an epigeneticist, but it's interesting to think about how maybe even the thoughts that maybe our mother was even thinking while we were in her womb may even affect us, and how powerful the energy that is thoughts actually is, and how part of the process of awakening really is not about fixing anything or healing things past a certain point, that there's nothing wrong with us, but what does need to happen is a wiping away of the narratives, the stories, the programs, the thoughts that we have on repeat that are often looping in our heads and that can keep us from tapping into that source energy and tapping into that divine quantum field of energy and of inspiration and of intuition that really allows us to be in our zone of genius, that allows us to be fully expressed, that allows us to, show up in a way in this world that is aligned with what our soul truly desires. And there is nothing that will bring more fulfillment and a greater sense of freedom than being in that alignment with your core truth. And that's why I think it is so important that time is spent really looking at where your thoughts and your mindset are holding you back. Even if you have evolved out of victim consciousness, even if you have, healed a lot of the obvious traumas that maybe plagued you, I feel like there's always a deeper level to dig into this. And I really feel this with myself. I feel like I've come so far on my journey, from feeling frustrated and burnt out and just completely not expressed as a woman in this corporate environment, to living a very, liberated life, to being much more in touch with my sensuality, my femininity, living a life that looks completely different than it did before, taking chances on love, on different investments, just all kinds of things. And I think about how far I come, and I still have those days though where I catch myself looping, and I catch myself getting caught up in thought patterns that I know are not gonna help me. And that's kind of one of the places you're gonna find yourself on when you're on a spiritual journey of awakening, is getting to that point where it's like your mind understands what's happening, but you still aren't fully embodied in it, and you still haven't fully integrated the lesson. And that's a good place to be though, because it's like anything, awareness is kind of the first step. So when you start to become completely aware of when it's your intuition talking, and when it's those monkey brain voices, those programs, those narratives, those looping automatic thoughts, once you're able to discern the difference between those two things, it gets much easier to bring yourself back into that alignment and to stay there for longer. And so that's really the work I do as an intuitive coach, is I help people connect with that inner voice so that they know what it feels like when they're there, when they're in alignment, when they're listening, when they're in tune with themselves. But then beyond that, it's like, okay, well, now that you know what that place feels like and you know how to access it, it's like, how do you do it consistently? And how do you make it more impactful when you are there, and so you can stay there longer when you're going about your day? And so, as you probably explored, there's so many different ways that you can tap into source energy and connect to your intuition. For me in my own spiritual journey, yoga was one of the first things that I really began to dive into. And I've also worked with breath work, I've worked with yoga, I've worked with meditation, and even things like astrology and tarot can be similarly useful in the way that they turn you back in on yourself. So the archetypal symbolism that they bring up, it stirs within you and within your own thoughts things that maybe consciously you wouldn't have come up with on your own. And so that, again, is your intuition kind of coming through and speaking through the archetypes and the patterns that things like astrology and tarot bring out. So there's lots of different ways to connect to source energy and to really hone your alignment and your connection to your own intuition. And I want to talk about today a couple of modalities that I use specifically that I feel like aren't talked about as often as I would like, and I think are very useful in how they can be used by themselves, in tandem with each other, or even with other modalities that can help connect you. And so what I'm going to be talking about today is Yoga Nidra, the yoga of awakened sleep, as well as psychedelics, and a little bit about how your brain works, specifically the default mode network. So what is Yoga Nidra? Yoga Nidra is the yoga of awakened sleep. It is based very strongly on Samkhya philosophy, which I won't go into all of that today, but it is an ancient, perhaps even pre-Vedic, philosophical perspective that shines a lot of light on who God or the self actually is. And yoga nidra it's similar to guided meditation. So if you've ever experienced a guided meditation on Insight Timer, or maybe you've worked with a coach who's led you through different visualizations, yoga nidra can be very similar, but it's different in how it's structured. And its structure is based on the Samkhya philosophy. And the way the philosophy basically states that the entire physical world that we see precipitated out of these different gunas and forces and elements that all originated from the ultimate all one being. And so this philosophy says that because we precipitated from this all one down through these gunas, these energies, these elements into these physical forms that we see, that means that within us all is that all one piece. So there's a piece of God in all of us. Again, this probably isn't anything new to most of you, but I want to explain the philosophy because it ties very directly into how yoga nidra works. So you can kind of think of it, one of the analogies I like to use for the precipitation narrative of Samkhya philosophy is like, we all have this inner light, and we're all like a billion light bulbs, shining all over the earth. And we have this inner light, but really the light isn't just coming from us. It's coming from this power plant, hundreds of miles away, where all the electricity, all the light is being generated from. And that is kind of the light, the source energy, the all one. And so when we want to connect back to that light within ourselves, sometimes what we have to do first is unidentify ourselves with the things that we are not. So you could sit here and say, I'm this beautiful light, but you might also think that you're the light bulb, or you might also think that you're the filaments in the light bulb that are producing the light. And the fact of the matter is yes, you are those things, but being the light, you are actually the source energy shining out through those different layers, through the physical mechanism of the filaments, through, the electrical charges and the wiring and the light bulb. And all of those physical components work together to shine your light outward. But the light itself is coming from a much further back source that we're all still connected to. We're tethered to it. And so that light is coming through us as if it's coming from a power plant far away, but it's coming into us. And then in our physical form, we're able to generate the expression of that light into the physical world that we see. So Samkhya philosophy basically believes or articulates that, you have these different bodies. And so, of course, we have our physical body, but then we have an energetic body, we have a blissful body, we have a mental, and we have an intellectual body. So we have these different layers of us that are encasing our true self, that source energy that we're all connected to and all part and parcel of. And we're like a series of, we're like nesting dolls. And so inside, in the very center core, we have that source energy. And then we have, our blissful sheath around us. And then we have our mental sheath, our intellectual sheath, our energetic sheath, and our physical sheath. And so this all connects to, how we can think about the different aspects of ourselves. We have our physical body, the part of us that needs food and water. And then we have the energetic part of us, our breath, our life force energy. We have our emotions. We have our intellect. We have all of the thoughts and the patterns and the narratives that we also consider part of us. But when you strip all these layers away, what you have in the center is source energy. You have that pure, all one creator, that Christ consciousness, Krishna consciousness, whatever you want to call it. You have that deep, all-pervasive consciousness, and that is your core. That is your spiritual center. And so again, there's lots of modalities that take you there, whether it's quantum entrainment or meditation, breath work. But Yoga Nidra specifically is designed as a form of meditation that moves you through each of these different sheaths of your body, as dictated by Samkhya philosophy, in a very methodical way. And it does this by, Yoga Nidras are really fun because they're guided meditations that can be written specifically for, whatever it is you're seeking. So if you're seeking, creativity and expansion, you could write a Yoga Nidra for that. If you're seeking groundedness, you could write a Yoga Nidra for that. So just like different guided meditations can have different topics, different intentions, so can Yoga Nidras. But they all start in the same way of basically first slowing down the body, then connecting you to your breathing and slowing that down, and then moving you through different exercises mentally that actually start to quiet your thoughts, still your thoughts, and bring you into a place of expanded creativity and visualization. At this point in a Yoga Nidra, it's usually when your facilitator will bring you through some kind of visualization that is imbued with symbolism, different archetypes, energetic patterns, those sorts of things, and they'll lead you through this visualization and into the deepest layer, the witnessing phase of Yoga Nidra, the Vijnanamaya Kosha, and that is where you actually can reach into a subconscious state, and you can work with your subconscious because you're actually witnessing your own non-consciousness. And that's why it's called the yoga of awakened sleep, is because Yoga Nidra is really about taking this specific deliberate form of guided meditation that removes these different layers and sheaths on your body in a systematic fashion while you stay aware and while you stay awake, so that you are able to be awakened in a place of unconsciousness. That's the ultimate goal of Yoga Nidra. So as you work through it, it becomes very much like a lucid dream where you are able to understand that the thoughts that are happening, but that the you who is actually witnessing them is somehow separate from that happening. And that's a very empowering feeling to have, to be able to mentally peel these layers of yourself off and feel what it feels like to actually be embodied and aware of yourself as source energy, as, omnipotent, omnipresent consciousness. So Yoga Nidra is very, very beautiful and fun and liberating in that way. I love working with the modality because it is so strongly based on philosophies that have shaped spiritual evolution on this planet for thousands of years in a very beautiful, compassionate, and loving way, and in a way that I think resonates and really fits strongly into, what other philosophies and other modes of thought are starting to see about different things. Like even, for example, quantum physics. There's so much in that really, when you read about it, and you start to understand it, it really has so much to do with these philosophies that have been taught and talked about for thousands of years. So these layers, these sheaths we have on our body that make up, who we think we are, Yoga Nidra helps us to remove these sheaths one by one. And these sheaths are called koshas. And the removal of these 5 layers is known as the Panchamaya Kosha, and that is kind of the steps that a Yoga Nidra meditation will guide you through. And when you go into a Yoga Nidra, you're going to want to set an intention called a sankalpa. And a sankalpa is like a very strong, deep-seated intention. So, for example, it could be something, you wouldn't necessarily just say, my sankalpa is to make more money next month. Your sankalpa would be something like, I live a life free from worry. I live a life that is abundant in all aspects. I live a life where money flows to me all the time from all places. I live a life where my relationship with money feels good. I live a life where I'm abundant in my time and free with my energy. So sankalpas are kind of like deeper values that are kind of perennial and that you want to see unfold in your life and last, throughout the rest of your time here on this earth. And so before you go into a yoga nidra meditation, you're usually going to be asked to create a sankalpa around the theme that your facilitator will be working with. So again, if your yoga nidra is for grounding, your sankalpa might be around settling your energies or calming your mind or feeling more rooted in your lower chakras. Whereas if it's for, creativity and expansion, your sankalpa might be to liberate your mind, to be a more clear channel for source energy, to, stop limiting yourself, with your mental narrative. So there's lots of different ways that you can set sankalpas. But what you'll do in the yoga nidra is your facilitator will lead you through the removal of the different koshas, starting with the physical, moving into those deeper subconscious levels. And you'll get to a point where you will be, actually several points usually in a typical yoga nidra, where you'll be asked to state the sankalpa. And so you'll really be, planting these affirmations yourself within your own brain when you are in a deep level of self-conscious witnessing, even at a subconscious mind state. And so it's a bit of a mouthful and kind of a lot to wrap your head around, but what it really comes down to is the way that our brain works and the fact that our brain is capable of all kinds of different thought patterns that actually we can scientifically measure as different forms of brain waves. So what we know is when you're sitting there balancing your checkbook, going over your schedule, stuck in traffic, stressed out, worrying about what you're going to cook for dinner or what your partner said to you the night before, like those are your beta brain waves that are working. And it's kind of your monkey brain. It's the part of your brain that was designed as fight or flight. It was designed to keep you alive. It's your survival mode. It's that part of your brain that's always working. It's your intellect. It's the brain that's trying to keep you safe, trying to keep you secure, trying to keep you healthy, part of the tribe, feeling how you want to feel. And it's also the part of the brain that for many of us, it's the only part of the brain that we know. It's the only part of us that we understand. I'm sure if you're listening to this, you've gone through some awakening of your own, or you're at least curious about it, or at the very beginning stages of it. But you can remember back, if you think about it, you can remember back to a time before you'd had your spiritual awakening. At least I can. I'm sure, there's some of you out there that have maybe been tapped into these things for a lot longer than I have, maybe since you were a kid even. But I haven't been. I can remember a time when my conception of myself and who I was completely in here. It was completely in that brain space of the stories I was telling myself, who I believed myself to be, what I allowed myself to be based on what other people said I was, and then just like this ball of emotions that I seemed to have very little control over and that always seemed to be kind of like at war with myself. And so there was a lack of consciousness. I mean, I feel like really spiritual awakening is the same thing as consciousness expansion. And that's really kind of the tenet of my business is consciousness expansion as a means of personal development and also like the ends of personal development, because I believe that consciousness expansion itself is so vital to how we evolve as humans and how we can really start to expand our conception of how we relate to each other and how we, engage in community, on both from the level all the way of, our intimate relationships to globally and how nations relate to each other. And so, when you're in that imminent consciousness, that's your beta brain waves, and that is your monkey brain, and you can live your entire life there and never ever feel like you have any control over your life. And so we know now, science has been able to show us that your brain has all these other layers of brain waves that you're able to go into. So you go into like an alpha state when you're really relaxed. Breath work can often take you there. And so you move through these different brain waves in the Yoga Nidra. And so the Yoga Nidra itself and how it's designed based on this ancient Samkhya philosophy wisdom actually mirrors and overlays perfectly on what science shows us the brain is doing. So I love seeing where like ancient spirituality and philosophy and those concepts are like now being articulated and shown to be very valid by science. And of course the language is different, but it's all semantics. When you really dive into it, it's interesting how these different layers of self that Samkhya philosophy discusses actually mirror quite well the different brain waves that your brain can actually produce based on the level of consciousness that it is in. And so the goal with Yoga Nidra is to take you all the way down to a theta state. And in that theta state, your brain is completely, it's not the monkey brain at all. Delta, theta brain waves, lower, I'm just checking my notes here. They are brain waves that transcend those fluctuations in the energy, in the technology that is your mind that come about from these thought patterns, these narratives, even our emotions, our aches and pains in our body. There's so many things that can constantly be like stirring up our mind and putting us back into that beta spot. And so Yoga Nidra helps kind of eliminate those things. It eliminates the physical, it eliminates the mental clutter, and it brings you down to theta, delta brainwaves and beyond. And when you're there, you are very open and very ripe to receive the wisdom that is source energy. And again, as you probably know from being on this journey, it's being tapped into that source energy. It's being tapped into that intuitive wisdom, that knowing that is going to lead you down the path of your highest good, that's going to help you manifest your abundance of freedom, time, money, whatever it is. And so getting the brain waves into that state, placing a sankalpa there and an intention, and practicing the act of actually being able to witness yourself in those deeper conscious states is an incredibly powerful tool and modality that I use both for myself and for my clients to start to really hone and reframe the way we think about ourselves and the way we are able to identify for ourselves almost immediately whether a thought we're having is something of value, something that's coming through us from source, or whether it's something that our mind, one of those sheaths, is manufacturing in order to do what the mind does, which is keep us safe and often, unfortunately, keep us small. And so, again, if growth is so much about removing the programming and removing what isn't us, one of the best ways to do that is to first come into contact with who we actually are, with that pervasive, omnipotent consciousness, and begin to identify with that and begin to understand how when we're not in that consciousness, we're actually kind of living between our ears and, regurgitating stories and narratives that often are just kind of loops in the energy within the technology that is the brain itself. And so that's why I think it's super interesting to talk about, the different brainwave patterns and the way that corresponds to Samkhya philosophy, and how Yoga Nidra helps us get into an actual scientifically measurable different brain wave state that can help us plant intentions in the subconscious from a conscious point of view, and also start to, understand better, well, if I'm this, then I'm not that. And then when that comes up, I'm not that, I am this. And you are able to start to really take control over your mind and recognize much more quickly when and where you are being, co-opted by your mental programming versus really leading from that sovereign place of your highest good and your internal knowing. So that's Yoga Nidra in a nutshell. It's a really fun, beautiful, ancient modality. I had the pleasure of learning it from Chitra Suku. She taught it beautifully, and I love being a Yoga Nidra instructor and really teaching people about awakened sleep and the philosophy that is behind it, because I feel like the philosophies themselves, once you understand them, add to the understanding and intent that you go into that kind of meditation with. And when you go, the more conscious you are of what's happening within you when you go into a meditation, I firmly believe the more successful it will be. I think that anyone can meditate and gain value from it, but I think that when you truly understand exactly what meditation is doing for you, I think that it like totally can collapse timelines and like expand worlds. So I love Yoga Nidra. And one of the other tools that I work with is psychedelics. And so again, totally different thing. Psychedelics, they also have very ancient roots. There's been evidence of psychedelic use, in shamanic practices, like across all continents, across all cultures. There's so much evidence for the use of psychedelics and what they're often called entheogens, which entheo is just referring to bringing out that God life force from within, the theo and the God within. And I brought psychedelics into my practice along with Yoga Nidra, because the more I learned about psychedelics, the more convinced I was that they also work on the brain at a level that can be extremely powerful and not only healing, but also incredibly expansive for people. And I think in particular for people that are working with other modalities like Yoga Nidra. So I work specifically with psilocybin, also known as mushrooms. I've gone through a pretty rigorous certification course with psychedelics. And of course, I have my own personal experience with the plant medicine myself. I, used psychedelics recreationally several times when I was younger. And they were always mind-blowing experiences that did truly, they took root in me. They were powerful experiences that stuck in my mind and in my memory as some of the most profound times in my life. But because I wasn't an awakened person yet, because I wasn't on this journey of self-awareness, I didn't really know what to do with that information. And that's one of the things that I think is the most interesting about psychedelics as they kind of start to get talked about more in mainstream culture as a healing tool, is the way that, psychedelics, they can be seen, and I think sometimes incorrectly perceived as like a quick fix or a Band-Aid. but they're not. And that's the thing, is meditation, something like meditation or yoga nidra, it might take more work to achieve that state of all consciousness. But with psychedelics, the work is on the back end. And what I mean by that is that psychedelics, they can instantly throw you into a state of super consciousness. But if you're not able to integrate the lessons that you have when you have a mind-blowing experience or a mind-blowing moment, then you're really not going to see the results that you expect. And it can often be a frustrating experience, or can leave you even more with like one foot in two different worlds. So I think psychedelics are an absolutely beneficial tool for people that are, developing themselves psychically, that are, growing and evolving as individuals, that want to improve their relationships with themselves, with other people. Psychedelics are absolutely a great tool, and I would put them, on equal footing with yoga nidra, meditation, yoga, whatever it is that works for you. But I think that they're even more powerful when they're used in concert with other modalities, because the integration and also the intention setting process is such a big piece of it. So psychedelics are really interesting because they are also scientifically shown to work on your brain in a very specific way that's similar to yoga nidra. Is all about removing these layers of us that we over-identify with and then fail to tap into our most powerful, deepest core self. A book I would highly recommend is Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind. It goes into the details that I'm going to talk about here in a second very, very well. And if you want to get kind of more into the nitty-gritty science of it, that would be a great place to start. But psychedelics basically have been shown to work on your brain by disrupting the brain's default mode network. So your default mode network is basically a collection of neural pathways in your mind that connect your brain's sensory processing with your limbic system. So it's basically connecting the part of your brain that receives information from the outside world, and it connects it to the limbic system, which the limbic system, as you might know, is not only connected with your olfactory, with your sense of scent, but it's also your memory system. So there's a reason why scent and memory are so closely linked, and that's all housed in that limbic system. But additionally, that limbic system is tied through this default mode network to your sensory processing apparatus. And what this means is that there is a set, multiple sets of neural pathways in your brain that are creating this feedback loop between what you experience, what you remember, and then how you continue to experience things. So the really interesting thing about this is if what you're experiencing at any given moment is connected to your memory, it means that your memory is influencing your perception. And scientists have been looking at this default mode network, which was actually only really recently acknowledged and discovered, in the last several decades. And so they're studying this network, and what they are concluding is that this series of neural pathways is kind of what is responsible for your ego construct. It's kind of responsible for your conception of self. And so the narrative, the story that you have playing in your mind at any given time about your life, whether it's a story of success and redemption, or whether it's a story of, I'm a victim, nothing ever goes my way, no matter what your story is, it's being reinforced by this feedback loop, this neural pathway that's linking your memory to what you're experiencing right now, and vice versa. So they have shown that psychedelics actually disrupt this default mode network. And that's why when people take psychedelics, they can almost instantly be transported into another state of consciousness. So, the analogy that Michael Pollan uses in the book, How to Change Your Mind, I want to share it here because it just was so effective for me in articulating kind of how psychedelics work on the mind. And basically, it's if the default mode network is like, your interstate, or like the Audubon highway. It's the highway that your brain is always zipping through. Your neurons are always zipping down the same highway, the same pathways. They're going to get to where they want to go as fast as they can. Psychedelics, basically, it's like shutting the highways down. Like, imagine if all the highways were shut down, and to get from point A to point B, all you could do was take the back roads. What you would discover is that there's like a million other ways to get from where you are to where you're going. And that's exactly what psychedelics do on your mind, is they shut down, they quiet that default mode network enough that your brain, your neurons actually begin creating new connections and new pathways where different areas of your brain that weren't in communication before actually begin communicating with each other. So it's like taking a few pathways offline and creating the opportunity for hundreds of other newer, smaller pathways to come online and completely reshape the way you see the world, because you're not only seeing it through this one looping perception, you're actually seeing all of these different facets that your brain just was not latched onto before. And what they've shown with psychedelics is that quieting this default mode network, this ego construct part of us, is so important, because it is those reoccurring stories and feedback loops that feed into some of the most insidious, mental health issues that we have in our society today, whether it's anxiety, depression, addiction. The thing that's similar about all of these different conditions is that they're based on neural pathways that are kind of stuck in a rut. They're based on a narrative. They're based on narratives that are being reinforced over and over again, and that the brain often cannot get itself out of. And so that's where different modalities come in to help people quiet the brain down and be exposed to literally a different way of being, a different way of seeing the world, a different way of experiencing things. So I like to compare and work with psychedelics and yoga nidra together, because it is so powerful to have a modality like yoga nidra that enables you to systematically and deliberately peel away the layers of your mental machinations to get down to the core of who you are, and then simultaneously be able to work with something like psychedelics, which completely does it for you. So it's a very, I think there's a lot of polarity in combining the two modalities, whereas, meditation is a very active, self-driven activity, very masculine energy in that way. And psychedelics, I think, are very feminine in the way that they are literally, you're taking a plant, you're taking a gift, something that was created on this earth that your brain is designed to receive in this certain way to have this entheogenic effect. And when you receive that medicine, you also experience a winding down of all of those thoughts and processes that you can get overly attached to and that you can define as you, and miss the bigger reality of who you actually are. So yoga nidra and psychedelics both work to do very similar things to the brain, which is actually changing the way your brain is operating, changing the level at which your brain is communicating with itself. And in doing that, it completely opens you up for a new perception of reality and what life can be. And I think it's incredibly powerful as we're working to manifest, the greatest abundance for ourselves in our lives, that we take very seriously the programming and the ideas that we know are getting in the way of us being there. It's so easy to, read a book or listen to a great talk about, you know, who you are, your true nature. But if you're not, engaging in those affirmations, if you're not practicing being in that alignment every day, if you're not embodied in that, then really you're just giving your brain something else to do, but you're not actually stepping into being a different way. And so the thing about psychedelics and meditation is that they're a gateway into a different way of being, where you actually get to put your brain on a different level and experience life without all those layers of ego and those reinforcing beliefs about who you are that are not actually the whole truth, and in fact are often contrary to the truth. So I think that yoga nidra and psychedelics are of huge value to anyone, on a spiritual journey, and anyone really interested in becoming like the true manifestress they're meant to be. Because I think that even, no matter how many books we read, no matter how much coaching we do, no matter how many, mentors we look up to or workshops we attend, if we're not really actively training our brains to understand what it feels like to be in alignment and to be connected on those deeper source energy levels, then we're going to constantly find ourselves falling back into the old thought patterns. And it's one reason why when I lead my clients on psychedelic journeys, whether that be a large journey, a 3 to 5 gram dose psilocybin journey, or microdosing, which is much less. Microdosing works, at a, when you microdose, you don't even know necessarily, nothing really changes in your conscious experience, but that default mode network is quieted down just enough to give you a little bit different perspective as you move through your day. So whether I'm working with clients doing large dose ceremonies or clients that are on more of a microdosing protocol, I like to use it in concert with yoga nidra because it helps them to understand a little bit better about what is going on within their own minds. And it also, I think, can really help kind of prep the mind before a psychedelic experience. And that's why I think that yoga nidra and other modalities similar to it that start to hone your intuition are really good foundational prep work to do before you start to use psychedelics. Again, no shade on anyone that, does anything any other way, but this is my own experience and my own client work, is that being able to lay the foundations of consciousness expansion really intentionally is a super healthy and I think super powerful way to then walk into the psychedelic space and really be primed for what it is all about. And so when I work with clients that are doing like a large dose ceremony, for example, I often start the ceremony with a yoga nidra session. And the reason for that is when you do a ceremony, you'll go into it, before the ceremony even begins, you're going to work with someone and set intentions and kind of, lay the ground rules for the space, kind of get an idea of what it's going to be all about. And when you walk into that space and actually take the medicine, it's going to take, usually a half hour, 45 minutes, maybe even an hour for the medicine to kick in, quote unquote, and really start to deliver to you the experience that you're there for. So in the meantime, it's often really common for people to have anxiety, for people to be a little bit worried or not feel good, not be sure about what's going to happen next. And I like to insert my yoga nidras into that space because I think it really helps prime the mind to be completely receptive to that blast of feminine energy that the psychedelics are going to be when they come into your space. And so you're able to, with your guide, walk through the Panchamaya Kosha, kind of quiet your body, begin to quiet your breathing, begin to still your mind and still your emotions, and come back to your center and come into that space where you can really consciously plant your sankalpa, set your intention for your ceremony, and then hopefully at that point you are expanding even deeper into what it feels like to be connected, because at that point the medicine is really kicking in, and not only are you in a different brainwave state, but that default mode network has been quieted down to a level that it really allows your mind to wander and expand and perceive things differently, but also it's gotten there in a way that feels safe, and you feel in control, and you feel, I think, maximally receptive to the plant medicine itself. And I say this because I know that the energy and the attitude you walk into a ceremony with is massively impactful to what you get out of the ceremony. And I think, and I know from my own experience, that walking into a ceremony with fear and walking into it feeling totally out of control can be intimidating and can often block you off from receiving the gifts of the plant medicine themselves, of the psychedelics. And so I believe that Yoga Nidra can be used kind of to grease the wheels of the self, of the mind, to kind of be primed to step out of the way and to engage in a ceremony in a very intentional and proactive way. And so I think it's, again, like I said, a great marrying of kind of a more masculine approach to knowing thyself, and a feminine receptive approach to just receiving these beautiful psychedelic gifts from the universe that can help us, completely shift our worldview and see, the truth of who we are beneath, the small-mindedness that we often get stuck in. So I think these two modalities in concert are extremely powerful. I've really been loving working with my clients in this way, combining these two modalities and using them as a way to open people up and help them expand their minds to the possibilities of what are available to them. And then, of course, with both modalities as well, it's equally important to have an integration period after. With psychedelics in particular, like I mentioned in the beginning, integration is key, because if you have this like mind-blowing experience where you like feel the love of the universe, or you feel completely connected to God and self, or you feel this, overwhelm of forgiveness, it's like, okay, so now you go back to your daily life. Like, what do you do with that? How do you incorporate that information and that knowing that you now have into your belief system, into the way you move through the world, into the way you show up at work and handle your relationships, into the way you view yourself and your relationship with money, with success, with power? So there's all of these considerations that need to be had. And I think on the back end, Yoga Nidra, along with other modalities like I've discussed, astrology, meditation, yoga, whatever, these can all be combined and into a practice that you can really build for yourself to help you stay flexible so that you can feel when you're in alignment, when you're connected to source energy, when your brain is open and creative and free, and when you're not. And when you're not, you'll be able to have, multiple tools in your tool belt to help you, stay more open, more receptive, and more expanded in how you view life and what's available to you. And that, as you know, is the key to manifestation. It's the key to your abundance. It's the key to the things that are going to help you move from point A to point B in your life. I really hope that you have enjoyed listening to me talk about Yoga Nidra and psychedelics and how they can be used together to create a really safe and empowered place to explore, the expansiveness and the power of your true self as, divine light, as source energy, as all of those things that you truly are, and that it can be so easy to forget in the noise and the narratives of the world. So if you would like to kind of experience this a little bit deeper, I do have a great freebie for you. I have a self-guided kind of Yoga Nidra 101 worksheet along with a Yoga Nidra for creativity and expansion. So while you can't do Yoga Nidra on yourself, you can make a recording of the Yoga Nidra and then play it for yourself, or you can have a friend kind of study the philosophy with you and walk through it with you. That's your freebie. Of course, I'm always here and available if you want to learn more about Yoga Nidra. And then for anyone that is VIP, I also have a kind of worksheet 101 on breathwork basics, as well as an hour-and-a-half long recording of a class I taught on breathwork basics. Breathwork isn't a modality that I covered in today's lecture very much, but breathwork is another one of those modalities that I use in my own personal practice, that I do explore with clients, and they can be very powerful for getting you into a state of being aware, primed, proactive, and intentional that I think is going to make you the most receptive and the best able to receive the gifts of psychedelics. So I hope you enjoy all of that. I hope that this has answered some questions for you and hopefully raised some others. And I really look forward to connecting with you. Again, my business is Awakening Chandra. You can find me awakeningschandra.com. Chandra is Chandra. You can also find me on Instagram at Awakening Chandra, and I have a Facebook page of the same name. I look forward to connecting with you and answering all of your questions about Yoga Nidra, psychedelics, and beyond.